chapter?
11. Luke chapter 11. And we will get to the rest of the verses eventually, but tonight we just want to cover that first verse. Verse 1 says this, I'm reading out of the New American Standard tonight. It says, and it came about that while he was praying in a certain place, after he had finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, just as John also taught his disciples. Now we've all heard that song, the old song, prayer is the key to heaven, but faith unlocks the door. And we've defined prayer as simply defined as talking to God, right? Most of the time, prayer becomes our laundry list of complaints and us getting out our personal soapboxes. Apparently, something must have caught the disciples' attention when they saw Jesus pray and heard him pray. Could you imagine watching Jesus as he's off praying, hearing those words come out of his mouth? We don't know what he prayed, but apparently something caught their attention. Now, something else caught my attention this afternoon when I was studying. They said, teach us to pray as John taught his disciples. So John must have taught somebody how to pray, and they must have realized there was something different about the way Jesus was praying. How many knows if there's anybody I want to pray like, I'm going to pray like he prayed? Amen. That's how we need to be. I was reminded of the story of Smith Wigglesworth. He said a husband sends for him, and him and the pastor go in to pray for the wife, and she's sick, laying in the bed, and the pastor goes to praying, oh Lord, give him strength. Help him through this time of grief. Help him when his mama dies and he's got to take care of all these kids by himself. And he thought, sure, Smith Wigglesworth thought, well, surely the husband will pray with a little more faith than that. And the husband picked up right where the pastor left off. Lord, I don't know what I'm going to do if she leaves. I don't know what's going to happen. And Smith Wigglesworth finally looked at both of them and said, hush and leave the room. And he began to pray the prayer of faith, and the rest of the story is she got up, she cooked supper for everybody. Some people treat prayer as a bargaining time. You remember Brother Nathan said that this past week, Lord, if you'll do this, I'll do this.
That don't work.
And that don't work, does it? That's the least.
I don't ever remember trying that, but I know you can't do it.
It doesn't work.
No.
And this is John the Baptist, right?
This is John the Baptist they're talking about. So the disciples asked Jesus to teach them to pray. They asked after watching him to pray. They wanted to pray like him. Is there anybody in your life you could think of that you'd like to pray like? Yeah. For me, that'd be my Uncle Willie. Billy Mack, I used to get so upset. Pastor asked Uncle Willie to pray over the blessing. Well, we was fixing to sit down and eat. And he'd go from Genesis to Revelation. I'm like, hush and just bless the food so we can eat. But Uncle Willie had a walk with God that I want today. I mean, I told y'all before, he lost 4 daughters to an unknown disease. All they know is they call it Lefwish disease. It's similar to Lou Gehrig's. And he'd still get up every morning praying for their healing. Still teach Sunday school. And still proclaim God can do anything. And be going through that in the midst of it. I want that kind of life. Now, while we were at Roosevelt, I had a heart-to-heart talk with the Lord. And I asked him, I said, why aren't we seeing people healed? Why aren't we seeing some of the things we used to see? And he kind of slapped me in the face, just to be honest with you. He said, we're not praying like we used to. I don't know about you, but I get in a hurry sometimes. My prayers are oftentimes rushed. Lord, I need you to do this. And before I know it, I'm already out the door and on to the next thing. Over the next month or so, we're going to talk about prayer and look at it a little differently, and I hope we see it in a different light. Prayer should be a priority, not a second thought or a whim. I mean, most of the time, that's our last thought in mind, isn't it? Our last thought is to pray about the situation. Our first thought is to do everything else but. And years ago, somebody made this statement, I wrote it down, and it stuck with me. We make time for the things we want to make time for. You know, if we want to eat, we want to go out to eat with friends, we'll make time for that. If we want to go fishing, we'll make time to go fishing. If we want to watch a movie, we'll make time to go out and watch a movie. So this tells us sometimes how high prayer really is on our priority list. You know what? Is everybody still alive?
Yeah, so far.
Okay. I know when she calls for you, it's normally dire situations. So tonight I want to talk about 3 enemies of prayer. The first one is interruptions. How many of y'all ever had that happen? You go to sit down, you go to praying, and what's the first thing that happens? Phone rings. Somebody comes knocking on the door. There's all types of interruptions that the enemy will try to do. Screaming kids. I tried one night. I was seeking the Lord, and I told Misty, I said, I'm going over to the church and pray. I'm going to pray all night long. That didn't last long. Because I had one at one door, one at the other door, but all hollering, Dad! Dad! And it's funny when you hear them, they get up across, they get their face up in the stained glass and it's muffled. So I knew I couldn't do that. This is why a lot of people choose to pray in the mornings, when everybody's still asleep and everything's going 3 o'clock in the morning. David didn't have a phone or a doorbell. But get this. He had 8 wives, 10 concubines, 22 kids, and a kingdom to run. That's a lot of distractions and interruptions, isn't it? But David's prayer time was in the morning. Matter of fact, this is how he prayed. Psalms 5 verse 3 said, My voice shalt thou hear in the morning, O Lord. In the morning will I direct my prayer unto thee, and will I look up. Susanna Wesley, how many know who I'm talking about? John Wesley's mama. She raised, I think, 9 kids, 8 or 9 kids, and she said her prayer time is being 1 to 2 in the afternoon every day. And she would do it. How many know that's important for us? That we have a set time and a set place. It's like I made this note, there are set protocols to go into the throne room. How many know when you're going to go see the doctor, you call and make an appointment, right? Most times you just don't go in and see a doctor on a whim, do you? We can't get into the White House on a whim, right? If you try, you will find yourself laying flat with a bullet somewhere. Or they will escort you off of the property very quickly. How many know it's the same thing with the master? Sometimes we need to make an appointment and a set time with him. Am I making sense tonight, y'all? This is...
You know, have you ever heard the interview with Dolly Parton?
Which one? She's done several, but...
Yeah, well, the one where she's talking about prayer.
Oh, I hadn't heard her say it yet.
She says she gets up every morning at 3 o'clock. Makes her some coffee, sits down, drinks her cup of coffee, says she talks to the Lord about an hour every morning at 3 o'clock. That's her schedule. Before anything gets going during the day. Now, you know, that's a good thing.
It is.
It's hard for everybody to
It
get
is
up
hard
in
to
the
do.
morning, though, you know. But
I had a teacher that did that.
that's what she does. She said.
She would get up at 3, have her time with the Lord, her coffee and her devotional time, then she'd grade papers, get ready, and come home to school. Dale mentioned something just then with, not everybody's going to be able to get up at 3. Here lately, that's when I'm getting up. Shana comes in from work, I lay down with the girls to get them sleep, and soon Shana comes in about 2 o'clock, I'm up for the next hour and a half before I can go back to sleep again. Don't get bound by a clock. Set this time between you and the Lord. Because it's not going to work for everybody. You know, prayer's not just a set time of day, it develops our whole attitude for the rest of the day. Have you ever gone without praying that day? Okay. Things didn't go right, did they? Everything fell apart. Everything goes haywire. Whether you choose morning, midday, or evening, or prayer time, it's important that you simply just have a set time and a place to pray. Jesus did. Jesus would go off and pray in the Mount of Olives. Now I'm going to ask you something, because this is something that really bothers me for a while. If Jesus had a set time and place to pray, how much should we have a set time and place to pray? He's the Son of God. But yet He made time to go pray. He made time to go out and seek the Father. Matter of fact, Matthew 6:6 says this. It says, when you pray, enter into thy closet, and when you shut the door, pray to your Father which is in secret. Now here's the key. Choose a quiet, private place to pray. That's hard to do sometimes, y'all. I love being at Roosevelt. I could sit out on that back deck and watch the ducks and watch everybody come up the water. It was so quiet and peaceful. It's hard to find a quiet moment sometimes. And maybe you've not ever had this problem. Anybody had this one? Drowsiness. You go to start praying and all of a sudden you find yourself. Some of John Wesley's early leaders determined to overcome this. They would soak towels and wrap their heads in cold water and pray on. I've heard somebody say one time they would. So they dared the devil one time to keep them fall asleep. They put one leg on each side of the bathtub and stood there with their Bible praying. I said, what happened? They said, well, it was going good for the first few minutes. The next thing I knew, I was laying on my back in the tub. I don't know what happened. Fell asleep. If you're around me much, I don't pray laying down. I may get in the altar for a little while and lay down. Most of the time, I pray standing up and walking. How many knows God's not required you to stand, put in a certain position to pray? He can hear you just as well standing up, sitting down, walking, running, however it fits your schedule. And then how about the wandering thoughts? You ever try to sit down and pray and all of a sudden your mind starts racing? I've got to do this, I've got to do this, and I've got to do... Oh, Billy Wayne raises his hand. He said, that's me, right there. Let me give you a few helpful things for this. One thing to do is make a list. I know that sounds silly, but make a list about what you want to pray for and pray about. Go down through it. Misty always laughs. I make a list for the list because I always forget half the time. Pray aloud instead of silently. Now, some people don't like that. But if it's just you and the Lord, who cares? Just pray out loud. It keeps your mind focused on what you're doing. Now, once these three are defeated, your desire to pray becomes nurtured, and maturity becomes a discipline to pray. And as you discipline yourself to pray, it becomes a delight to pray. How many know sometimes that first couple times you try to pray, it's going to be hard? I can't do this, Lord. Start out easy. Y'all don't try to pray for an hour and a half. Pray 5 minutes. Say, Lord, I'm here. I love you. Thank you for this day. Keep me today. Let me be alive for you. Amen. You read your daily reading or however you want to do it and then go on. Don't try to overwhelm yourself all of a sudden, How many know Rome wasn't built in a day? And don't worry if some days you don't shed any tears or feel any emotion. We've got so wrapped up in that, y'all, that everything has to be emotional. Some days you ain't going to feel it. Let's just be real. How many know some days you don't feel like being here? Oh, come on. Every one of y'all, when I said that, everybody's head was down like this. Now I know how everybody feels tonight.
I was debating.
You were debating. See, how many know there are some days you don't want to be in service? Come on, let's be honest.
Some days you don't feel good.
Some days you just don't feel good. Some days you just don't want to be around nobody.
That's what I was gonna say, it's not service, sometimes you see so many people, you just don't wanna see no more people for a while. I mean, it's just not service, you know, it's,
I think I've told the joke before. You know, the young man's laying in bed, and the wife comes and knocks on the door. Time to get up, it's 7 o'clock. He rolls back over, goes back to sleep. 8 o'clock, she comes knocking on the door again. He says, ah, rolls back over, goes back to sleep. She knocks on the door again at 9 o'clock, said, I told you twice, I'm not going to tell you again, it's time for you to get up. He said, give me 3 good reasons. She said, number 1 is 9 o'clock, number 2 is Sunday morning, and number 3, you're the pastor. I mean, we just don't want to do things sometimes. Sometimes we're tired. It has been an eventful week. Everything has piled up and everything has crushed in on you, and you don't feel like going nowhere. Just pull the covers up over my head, let me have a cup of coffee, and I'm going back to bed. Matter of fact, I'll tell on him. Brother Nathan, I called him Monday. I'm out and about. It's 9 o'clock. I said, well, how you doing? He said, I'm still in bed. I said, what do you mean you're still in bed? He said, talk to me a little bit. I called him back about 12:30. I said, what you doing? He said, I'm still in bed.
You ain't got no youngins.
That's what he did. I told him, I said, I prayed you and Amber a child. I prayed it now. Said he got up at 6, rolled back over, said, I ain't getting up. Said the alarm went off at 8:30. He rolled back over and said, I ain't getting up again. How many knows there's some days like that?
must be nice.
That's what I said.
I ain't had them days like that forever.
I ain't either.
Unless I'm sick, and I don't have kids, but it's always somebody wants something. Which I'm blessed because that's my job. And
Hey, the other day I got to sleep till 8:30. I didn't know what to think.
I would just stay in bed. I go sit in the chair. I stay in bed.
At least move from one location to the other, right? See, those times that we feel least like praying may be the times we need to pray the most. Does that make sense? As Brother Leon Beasley used to say, this means yes, this means no. God's not so much moved by your tears and emotion as He is moved by His word and your obedience and tenacity. How many knows it's not a suggestion that we pray? It's a command that we pray. If we want to be as close to the Lord as we can, prayer is not an option. It's a necessity. We must pray. Every prayer time is going to be different. Not every time is going to be swinging from the chandeliers, you shouting and prophesying and speaking in tongues. Sometimes you're going to find yourself on the floor weeping and blubbering and travailing in prayer over somebody else. Sometimes you'll be declaring the word over the situation. Sometimes it'll be a time of work, it'll end up in worship. Sometimes it'll be simply praise. It's different. I like this quote. Some days you're digging holes, some days you're planting poles, some days you're stringing wire, and then one day the circuit is completed and you make contact. Doesn't that sound like prayer? Some days you're trucking along, you're doing it just because you've got to do it, and then there are other days when everything clicks together and all of a sudden it's like, you know, it's like you really talked to Him. It's like you really finally broke through. Have you ever done this? Have you ever prayed and felt like the prayers didn't make it past the ceiling? I don't know about you, but I have. I'll be perfectly honest. And this is, I think, what the Lord's got me in this vein to teaching on prayer. I can't tell you how many times I've prayed for people to be healed and I ain't seen it. And it bothers the stew out of me. You're supposed to be this, and this is the voice I hear, Brother Wayne. You're supposed to be the pastor. You're supposed to be full of power and everything else. Why ain't everybody getting healed? Why ain't everybody getting excited like you are? And I finally came to the realization, not everybody's going to be like you, though.
Everybody's different.
Everybody's different. But one thing I've got to stress is we've got to pray. More now. I mean, when you told me that 38,000 with the kids, that broke my heart. Because that could be my two. That could be the kids' bag. Your kids, Billy Wayne. Other situations that I know of, just breaking my heart tonight. And we use this cliche a lot of times, well, there's nothing else we can do but pray. But how often do we really do it? How often do we really do the but pray? Am I making sense tonight, John? Because this prayer's been really heavy on me for the last couple of days. And you're going to find out as we go through this, when Jesus teaches the disciples how to pray, it's specifically how they pray. It's not a, well, you just, it's very specific what he asks them to pray. And teaches them how to pray. And we're going to find out in the next couple of weeks how you appropriate the names of God as it goes through this prayer. Anybody want to pray like him? That's the whole purpose of this. I want to pray like the Master prayed. In the late 80s, a guy came out by the name of Larry Lee. And I watched him. I was a teenager, young kid, teenager. Man, he was dynamic, he was powerful. And he taught this book I've got called Could You Not Tarry 1 Hour? On praying. And I'm like I'm like one chapter out from finishing it tonight. And it's changed my life, y'all. On how I pray. On how I pray for you. On how I pray for Misty. How I pray for the girls. And I want to see us become a praying church. We may be small in numbers, but the one thing I know is that we can pray. And they used to talk about how those churches across the railroad tracks, that they may not have looked the fanciest, they may not have had the best facilities, but that's who they called when something happened in town. I want us to be one of those churches that if people know to call that bunch down there because they can pray through. This is hard. Looks like we need to pray for Jody. I just realized, I just saw the Band-Aid across his head. He said something to you, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He back-talked him, but you popped him. I know that.
Dermatologist got a hold.
Oh, bless your heart. So what I'm going to do, Saturday night I'm going back to pray here in the sanctuary before service on Saturday nights at 7. I want as many people to join me as we can. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the whiteboard up and I'll have a list, because I know how it is when you come in to pray. I'll have a list. Say, okay, let's pray for this tonight. And then the next week I'll have something else that we'll pray over. Because this week we'll probably be praying over the kids going back to school. And that, because I'm going to lay hands on them Sunday morning before they start school next week. Because how many knows they need it now more than ever? And we were talking in the car yesterday. Matter of fact, Misty got online to double check if we were going to teach critical race theory in Mississippi. And of course, the state superintendent said it's not coming to Mississippi, but there's no law passed yet, that we're against it. So.
Well, my cousin's wife took from one of their daughters, and they asked questions: was she born female? Do y'all consider her female? Do y'all, do y'all dress her as a female?
So this, yeah, they were 2 ladies.
Everything's going crazy.
And the wife told said, "You're making me uncomfortable. I'm religious, and you're making me uncomfortable." She said, "This is my daughter. She was born a female, and she is a female."
There you go.
Can I tell you that the closer we get to his coming, the worse it's getting, guys.
I went to the doctor last week up there at the clinic at Union, and they updating their system. And the nurse asked me to identify as a male when they was updating my profile.
See,
Do what happened?
that's what
I went to the clinic last week up there at Union,
Yeah. Oh, it's in all the hospitals.
and they updating their system
Yeah, they're doing it everywhere.
and updating my information and stuff. And she asked me did I identify as a male.
Yeah, that's
Well,
what
what do you think? Yeah.
I told her, I said, well, I ain't gonna say I ain't gonna repeat what I said, but anyway.
But to ask they
Did you ask for
invest,
You know, rep, do you?
Yeah, I did.
to bring that to
Not
that
the way
child's
you
mind, you know, for her to think on that.
He thought that's the difference.
Well, you know, that was one of the big deals during the presidential election. Biden made the statement that an 8-year-old can choose their sexual
Yes.
orientation.
Well, I saw on Facebook, oh, it's been a good while back, and then when he putting male or female on the birth certificate, when they got up big enough,
They can make the decide for
themselves.
themselves. Is that ridiculous, y'all?
It's
It's
stupid.
evil.
It's not just stupid. Michelle's right.
That's
This
right.
is
She's right.
straight up evil.
Mhm. And every time you see an advertisement, it's either 2 men or 2
Right.
women, or it will be,
Mixing the races.
and, I've got nothing against you, and I've got nothing against you, but I love this man. Or I don't care nothing about them either, but, you know, but, I mean, it beats all I have ever seen in my
I
life.
wonder if Zen is it's natural.
Well-
Uh-huh.
What's natural?
Well, the Bible teaches you what's natural about Genesis.
Exactly. But here's,
I know.
remember what the Apostle Paul said? He's talking to the church at Rome. And he makes these statements. And if this is not where we're at, y'all, I don't know. Let me find where what I'm thinking. Therefore, God, okay. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. And exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man, and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Therefore God gave them over in their lust of their hearts to impurity, that their bodies might be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this reason God gave them over to degrading passions, or a reprobate mind is what the translation says. For their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman, and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men, committing indecent acts, and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind, or a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, sounds like Washington, deceit, malice. They're gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, that they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them.
Yeah. See, they're teaching the children evil. That's what to do.
That's exactly what we do.
Brainwashing them.
Yeah,
That's exactly right, Michelle.
It's a cult. They brainwashing them.
E.W. Jackson used those same words today. That we are having a cult mentality come over the nation.
We are.
Wasn't he the one talking about that doctor in California that had to give an apology, or gave the apology or whatever?
Oh, for calling
For
pregnant women pregnant women.
Yeah.
That was a university professor.
Yes,
Yeah, he had to recorrect himself because the students stopped him.
yes. And now,
I told him, if you don't like my class, there's a door.
and breastfeeding is no longer called breastfeeding. It's called chest feeding.
What?
Chest feeding.
Breastfeeding is now chest feeding.
Because all these
Because-
people,
Okay, I didn't catch all that.
Men have chest, women have breasts.
Breast.
How dumb can you get?
Y'all,
it's getting there, it's getting there.
They're getting there.
They showing
I
us
think they're
stupid.
already there, Michelle.
I think we have hit the place now that I believe some have been turned over to a reprobate mind. No doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
That there's no going back for them.
Nancy Pelosi, the first one on the list.
I believe it. I believe we're standing at a place now where I never thought in my lifetime.
This is where you have to trust God and teach your kids right and hope.
That's what we said.
Pray
Is that
they-
not what
pray
we
they
said
grow up
Sunday
right
night?
in that bed.
That's right.
We've got to
You
get
don't
back-
take these people in Washington to change what you don't want.
We've got to get back to where all education starts well, no, let me rephrase that. All education starts at home, and then we continue it here.
Yes.
And confirm and reaffirm.
You know.
Alyssa.
I said I didn't know if I was gonna go in sub, but I think tonight just maybe gonna go sub. Get my 2 bits worth in.
We need teachers like you do.
I'm telling you.
That if the kids come and ask you, well, Mr. Thompson, what do you believe about this?
Yes, sir.
And as you begin to tell them, it'll prick hearts.
That's terrible.
I wouldn't want to be a teacher right now. They wouldn't have fired me. First time somebody said if you either teach homosexuality is right or wrong, or you gone. I said, well, bye.
Well, you know, it's like teaching evolution.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we had to teach evolution.
Right.
And I told them when I taught that subject when we come to evolution, I said, now here's what I believe. Y'all can take what y'all want to believe and we'll go from here. I believe the Lord created the earth. I believe the Lord created man and woman. The Lord created everything. It says so in the Bible in Genesis. Now these people teach you we came a monkey. If you want to think we came a monkey, you believe that. I don't. Now we don't talk this. Let's go. I just skipped the rest of it. I mean that's it. That's all I can say. I wasn't gonna teach them. We come a monkey. We lost our tails. We stood upright.
Some folks
If
still
you
lost
don't
their
believe
tail.
it.
Oh, did I say that out loud?
You don't teach you.
Yeah, we recorded that, but that's okay.
Well, they finally found it. Ain't nothing.
I missed it, what?
I said, some folks ain't lost their tail yet.
But you know, it's just hilarious.
We are sitting now, y'all. I remember my grandmother telling me how everybody thought